Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today we look at a very cute little sword. And I mean little, literally. If you look closely, you'll see my hand hardly fits in the grip. And to be honest, it really does not fit in any functional way. So why is that? We can speculate in just a moment. But we don't have any, obviously we don't have any precise reason for it. But first, let's look a little at what this sword is. So this is what is referred to as a IOD, alter art degen. That's a bit of a mouthful. So let's break it down. IOD, as we've seen in a previous video, refers to Infantry Offizier degen in German. That would mean infantry officer's sword. Alter art is the term that was used to refer to weapons that were designed in a old-fashioned style. So alter art means in the old style. So when you see a weapon referred to as alter art, it means that it's a weapon that in modern times, at the time, was designed with a old design in mind, like kind of nostalgic vibe, I guess. And swords like these alter art swords, were very common among German officers, all the way up to their formal substitution by the IOD 89, which we saw in another video. So these were used up to the late 19th century, but even beyond, because we have swords like these produced even up to World War I. But as you can obviously tell, the style of these is very reminiscent of court swords, small swords from the late 18th century, even spadroons. So it is definitely kind of a design that's looking back to the past. It has some fairly familiar characteristics. So you'll see this kind of urn pommel and the shell guard. But you can find a lot of variation because the sword wasn't always standard issue. Actually, in many cases, it was customized, as is often the case with 19th century swords. But also, it wasn't necessarily only used by the military. So while the name that you'll often find is IOD, it's not necessarily the case. This was used by different units as well, but was also used by, for example, officers in postal service or railway service, but also used by non-military people. So as part of, I suppose, formal dress or like, I imagine other kinds of uniforms not related strictly to military service. So you'll find a whole bunch of different variations. So why is this one so small? Well, initially I thought it might be a child's sword, but the blade is actually a full-length blade. So there's a lot of variation even in terms of blade, of course, but this is actually on the long side for these swords. The whole sword measures around 1 meter, and children's versions are usually maybe this long. So it's not really a child's sword. My hypothesis here is that this was a custom sword designed for someone who had a small hand and preferred a grip that fit their own hand rather than the standard issue one, which is a little bit longer. And this is maybe supported by the fact that this sword has a furbisher's mark or a outfitter's mark on the spine. Obviously, it's just circumstantial, but as we know, a lot of officers didn't necessarily, especially towards the late part, I suppose, of the 19th century, and especially with swords that weren't meant for combat, they'd buy their whole uniform, including their sword, at an outfitter, rather than buying the uniform at an outfitter and having the sword bought by a cutler or a sword maker. And lots of times these swords from outfitters can be hit or miss quality, of course, because they were kind of just an accessory to a full uniform. So my speculation, together with a few variations this one has compared to the standard issue model, which we're going to see in detail now, makes me just think that this was a custom design for someone with a small hand. So enough with the talking, and we'll dive into the details right away. Let's take a close-up look at the alter art. So, well, let's start by the guard. We have this, as I mentioned, a very small grip, so you can see compared to the hand. And this is made worse by this sharply downturned shells in the guard. If these were hinged or angled differently, my hand could actually fit, but they aren't, so it doesn't. What makes this evidently a custom sword to me is the quillen, which in all standard issue or in most pictures you'll find is straight. So it jots out straight and has an acorn tip rather than this upturned kind of plume quillen. So to me this says custom sword, I suppose. We see this brass cover, which would have covered part of the grip. And currently we have this velvet kind of fabric. I don't know if this is original, I doubt it. All the swords I've ever seen of this type have metal wire wrapped around the grip. And here towards the end of the grip, this is not a cover, this is actually an integral part with the pommel, and this whole thing pops out in one piece. And then we have the pommel cap here, which is threaded and can be unscrewed. The knuckle bow is quite plain, but it has the decoration here at the end, which is very typical of spadroons or similar standard issue swords. And the shells are not they're not a one solid piece, like they have this lip to them. I mean, they are a solid piece, but they're not like a thick piece of brass. Moving on to the blade, we have, well, for starters, we have a maker's mark. So this would be the Klemmen and Jung Solingen maker's mark. This is one of the top blade makers from Solingen. So it should be a sign of quality. And then, as I mentioned, we have a furbisher's mark, which is, let's see if we can get it in focus or visible. Yeah, you'll see a Moor and Spire in Berlin. So Moor and Spire in Berlin was a company that, Moor and Spire was a company, as I mentioned, of outfitters and furbishers. They, interestingly enough, and I think this tells us something about perhaps the logistics of military equipment and custom military equipment. They were headquartered in a Jägerstrasse. So Jäger is hunter, and is basically the equivalent would be the Jäger, would be the chasseur à cheval in French. So a cavalry unit. So they were stationed in a street that perhaps has a military name, and that street was close to the Gendarmenmarkt, so the gendarmerie market. And to me, this kind of paints an image of perhaps a district or an area where you had a lot of soldiers and military personnel working or being stationed. And around these areas, you would probably have all kinds of different suppliers and workers in a related field selling their wares and adapting, customizing, and repairing stuff. So it kind of gives me this impression of a very military-centric area where these businesses were able to thrive. Moving forward to the details of the blade. For being such a simple little sword, the blade is actually very beautifully decorated. So I hope you can see, because it's really tough with the fuller and glare to get it filmed. But there's a lot of military themed decoration. You can see some flags, some lances with flags. And let me try and get it in focus a little better. Okay, we can see an eagle with a crown. I have not been able to identify this eagle, so if anyone has some information, it does not look like the Prussian one, so I don't know what's up there. And again, some floral decorations, and then again, like a panoply with swords, shields, lances. So initially, given the small size of the hilt, I was inclined to think that this may be a non-military blade, but the decorations on the blade are so military-centric, because even on this side we'll have a whole bunch again of, I hope it's visible, I really, really hope it is. But yeah, we have, maybe this way, no. But yeah, we have military lances again, like these weapon panoplies. You'll see here again. So the theme is way too military to me to mean that this, to signal that this blade would have been used, for example, by a diplomat or something, but who knows. Definitely need to research that more. And then we have, to finish, on the blade we also have this decoration on the spine, like this wavy design to it. And there we go. So, I hope you enjoyed this sword as much as I do. Not so much the hilt, that is very uncomfortable and it really eats into my hand over here. But the blade I find actually quite beautiful. I really love the etchings, and I think some more research, I'll need to do some more research on the kind of symbology of the decorations. I'd like to understand that a little better. As this is a very easy sword to take apart, you just need to unscrew this pommel cap. I might, if there's any interest, or maybe even if there isn't, I might just make it anyway. I might make a video taking this sword apart, and then we'll look at whether or not there are some, there's some information or some useful or interesting things to see under the hood of this IOD. So thank you for watching as usual, and I'll see you in the next video.